Well, hello and welcome back to episode 3 of Two Guys Talking Sales. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Sean.
And we're glad you're here. In this podcast, we talk about real sales issues, big and small, for salespeople, selling situations, and sales leadership. Collectively, we built successful sales careers around the problems and solutions used in B2B selling. From software to services to manufacturing distribution, we've sold to and for many of the world's most recognized brands, and some you've never heard of. For about the next 15 minutes, we're going to invite you into our world of experience where we'll take an issue and dig into it so you have a solution should you encounter a similar situation in your career. Today, we're going to be talking about sales representatives and quotas. Sean, let's get started.
I think this is a great topic, especially since we're doing this in the middle of October. So we're getting to that point where people should be starting to plan for their sales teams. What are those objectives going to be for next year? At least starting that process, right? So you don't have to have it done. My preference on this is that CEOs should deliver this plan on what your sales person is supposed to do for 2023 for the next year. You should deliver that roughly December 1st. That's always been my goal. It gives plenty of time for the salesperson to accommodate that, deal with that, and then make the appropriate requests or whatever, and so that everybody's ready to go on January 1.
Good. Completely agree. You need to have some preview of what the expectations are. It's how you create a vibrant and successful sales team, not starting with a quota that is issued 3 months after the year starts, right?
And we probably have both had that happen. So
no, that would never happen. That never happens. All kidding aside, but we should probably, for our listening audience, for everyone listening, we should probably start with how we experience assigning quotas. So let's take this kind of point counterpoint. Big organizations, small organizations. Yeah, big is more than 10 or more salespeople. Small is a few, couple, maybe even a founder-led sales organizations. Now, how do we break apart the big pieces of assigning quota?
Let's talk about the big ones first, right? So big is actually a little easier because you have the ability with multiple salespeople, especially once you get to 8, 10, 12 salespeople on your team, you have the ability now to average them. You can expect that some of them, 2 or 3, are going to do incredibly well. They're going to blow quota away. And a couple of them are probably younger in the company. Maybe their territory isn't as well developed, whatever, and they're going to struggle a little bit more at making their assigned quota. But you average that out, and it's much easier. Smaller is tougher because now you're working with smaller numbers. So right. The issue is going to be if one blows it away and the other 2 don't, does that really average out, or vice versa? They all kind of don't do great, but they don't do terrible. So we have the problem with smaller and bigger. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I like the approach of big versus small company, or big count of staff versus small count. When I'm working with bigger companies and bigger staff quantities, we typically look company goal, strategic goal, and back into some numbers, top down a P&L. I pivot that specifically for anybody who's working on a commercialization effort, startup, anybody who's trying to ramp up sales with founder-led up to about 5 salespeople. When I'm working with those smaller companies, I tend to focus heavily on the relationships that exist, the targets of who you're going to acquire, and probability. So really, it's a account-based marketing kind of focus versus a top-down P&L management kind of. So really, really heavily focused on relationships on the smaller ones for the purpose of assigning a quota. Relationships are not responsible. Wrong word, Kevin. Relationships are really important regardless of which size you're working with. But when it comes to assigning quota, especially on the less than 10 sales reps, I'm working real hard on finding out the relationships that exist that can drive a realistic number.
I also I don't care how big your number of salespeople are, I like the idea of what is the available market in that salesperson's territory, whatever that territory might be. If you have defined territories by geography or by company, named account kind of territory, those are all just territories, right? Or by industry, those are just defined territories. So what's the available market of that salesperson has access to? Now, a lot of our customers are relatively small, and so they kind of have an infinite number of opportunities available to them, with the exception of just trying to break into those companies. But so if I'm $5 million in revenue, I probably can expect that I'm going after 100 million to 200 to $1 billion market. So therefore, I have I can't even do all those deals. I have an unlimited potential market. But there's times when I have named accounts, and even smaller companies will sometimes do named accounts, and I'm not against doing a named account territory. If you have named accounts, then you can pretty much define how much revenue potential is in that territory, and that should define your quota for that salesperson as well.
Good deal. Hey, I'm sure you've experienced this in your career. I know I have, where you, as the sales manager, assign a quota versus a strategic planning session where there's a group think, meaning a group of people come together, maybe all the sales reps come together on small teams and define what they think their market can return. And that sets the quota, not only for them individually, but also for the company. Let's go point counterpoint, and let's talk about some best practices for setting good quotas and how to avoid misstepping and misplacing a bad quota on somebody.
Sure. That last point is really critical. If you put a unrealistically high quota onto a salesperson, I don't care if they're a great salesperson or they're just getting started in their career, it is demotivating fairly quickly. They're going to realize 2, 3, 4 months into the year that they're in trouble, and they're not going to be able to dig themselves out. So then they are demotivated. They don't work as hard as they possibly should. They really don't see a reason to be successful. And then they start looking for a job. And that's painful. That's very painful. So I think we always got to be careful about giving too big of a quota for any individual person. A larger company, especially if you're a public corporation where you and I have spent a lot of our early careers, the quota is actually set by the CFO and the CEO. The CFO and CEO tells the street, we are going to do 10% better next year than we did this year. They committed that to their investors, the investor community. They told the Wall Street Journal that, and that number just has to flow down from that point, right? There's just no ifs, ands, and buts about it.
Yep, earnings per share is a huge driver there.
Exactly.
So let's take that as a case study. So where you're being assigned a quota, where we as sales leaders for organizations are assigned quotas, the company says, hey, we want to grow from 5 to 10 million a year, right? They want to double. And your number can be 1 to 2, 5 to 10, 100 to 200. Double is really what we're working with here. Let's talk about how we assign that out and how we resource that with people.
So as a sales manager, I think what you have to do is you have to look at your people and what can they do. So you've already been given your number. Your boss, the president, the CFO gave you your number. You're taking a look at what do my people probably can do without doing amazing deals, because you can't forecast amazing deals. You just can't count on them. So you take a look at your number, you compare that to the number that you've been asked to hit, and you see if there's a delta there. If there is a delta, then your first step needs to be have a conversation with the CFO or whoever, the president, and talk about the number of resources that are available to you to make that happen. Unfortunately, with longer sales cycle type products, you may not be able to affect, by adding a few more people, you still may not be able to affect quota for next year. But that should be part of the conversation if you find out that there's a big delta between what you think your guys can do, your team can do, and what the CFO expects. If there's not a big delta and you can live with it, or if you're told you have to live with it, which I've had both happen to me, then at that point you choose, do you want to have an even, everybody gets the same quota because everybody has the same potential? Or I'm going to give one person a little bit more, another person a little bit less. It's easy to say a little bit less if they're relatively new to the organization. They're still going through their learning curve of learning the product and learning the industry. But after they've been there for 6 to 9 months, then that's a harder case to make, unless it is a different type of a territory and there's more territory available or less territory available for them to make their number. So I think you have to do that and kind of average it out and figure it out from that point.
Yeah, completely agree. And I'm always one not to do crazy things with quota, right? I never assign triple the company goal, right?
Right,
Because then you're setting a lot of people up for failure. I like
right.
some of the published research out there that says, 80% of reps don't make quota every year. There's a reason for that. What's the quota? Was it realistic? But the key thing I took away from what you just said is that you have to have that reasonability test, right? We
Right.
have to live in some degree of reality. And for the companies that are on ramping, think of ones that are starting to experience meteoric growth. Like, how do you set quotas for meteoric growth? And often I find one of the best practices is to make sure I've got a counterbalancing measure. So, for example, if I'm looking to acquire 100 new logos quarterly, annually, monthly, whatever the number is, if we're looking to acquire that many net new logos, we have to have something that counterbalances, make sure we're not giving things away. It's got to be profitable, right?
Right.
We're not doing speculative sales management. We're doing actual sales management. Most of our companies that we work for are at a size where there is no speculation,
Yeah,
right? It's
exactly.
all about production.
Yeah.
And the year long sales are really coming into play.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just had a conversation with the chief operating officer on a very similar subject to what you just said. And they had a goal of a certain number of new logos for next year. They're starting their planning process right now. And I said, if you're going to drive that number and everybody's going to know that number, that's okay. But do you want to pay your salespeople on that number? Because you should have your sales goals aligned with your company goal. If your company goal is 20 new logos or 100 new logos, like you said, then maybe you should consider having a spiff or something that's in place that achieves a number as opposed to a revenue number. And that can be a little bit challenging in certain situations. So you got to be careful about that and have that conversation internally. But it is reality that your individual sales team's goals needs to align with the goals of the company, and there has to be a lockstep. So everybody in the company is going after 20 new logos, 100 new logos, whatever the case may be, and everybody knows that that is the goal of the company. Not so much the revenue, even though the revenue is probably still important, especially for I don't care. It could be small companies or big companies. Revenue is important. Let's just be honest.
Good, good. Hey, let's do a quick review here of some of the things we've covered, because I do want to get to the topic of how to prevent sandbagging. But
Okay.
so far, we've talked about appropriate goals. We've talked about not over assigning quota, or even when you're assigned quota, how do you ensure that there's a reasonability test to it? But when we're talking about ensuring that most of your reps hit their goal, right? That means the company's achieving their goal. How do we balance that with consistency and not setting the goal too low or letting someone sandbag a quota? One of my takeaways in every stop along my career path has been making sure there's a reasonability test right there.
Right.
Same kind of reasonability for assigning it, but also reasonability for what's in their existing pipeline. So we have to kind of be forensic accountants at some point in our job. What's in the pipeline already? What are the relationships perennially returned? What is the likelihood that they can repeat that kind of business? Any best practices from your side?
Yeah, I like everything you just said. I also like, and some people don't like this terminology. It's the terminology that I've always used, and that is, I want a cliff at the end of the year, at the end of the fiscal year. The cliff is my rate of being my commission rate in January has to be at a significant difference than my rate is going to be in December, so that there is a reason, that there's an urgency to get that deal done. That eliminates a lot of the sandbagging, because the salesperson says, that dollar that I bring in revenue, I'm going to get 10 cents on that dollar or 5 cents on the dollar, whatever your rates are, right? But in January, maybe I'm only getting 2 cents on the dollar. That incentive makes things happen. I tell this to a lot of people. Salespeople can rarely make a deal go faster. The customer is going to buy when the customer buys. Yes, we can be prompt to make it be as compact as possible, but this customer is going to buy when the customer is ready to buy. So it's very rare for a salesperson to be able to make a revenue happen early, but the salesperson can always slow down the deal. They can always take a little longer to send out that quote, take a little bit longer to set up that next appointment, take a little bit longer to set up the reference call, whatever the case might be. They can easily slow down a deal. It's a couple weeks to a couple months if they're being creative about it. And if they need to sandbag and push that deal into next year, they can do it. They're absolutely, you can take any deal in November and make it a January deal without any problem at all.
Wow. So there's a huge nugget from today, and I think that's probably a good one to end on. So help avoid sandbagging by setting appropriate goals, training people into good behaviors with good management of setting the targets and developing the cliff, the escalation of the percentage that you're paying for over goal kind of behaviors. Sean, bring us home.
So this has been a lot of fun, and I hope you have enjoyed episode 3 of our little adventure here. We're going to do these every week. Going to come out on Tuesday afternoon every week. Episode 4 is going to be out in just one more week from today. So we hope you come back and enjoy this. In the notes below, you'll have links in the comments. I always have a comment there. There's links to past episodes. There's links to future episodes as we've scheduled them on LinkedIn. But just count on coming back every 4:30 on Tuesday afternoon and have a little listen to what Kevin and I are talking about. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thanks, Sean.